to basically come and help us to develop a communication strategy. And they've got some ideas that they would like to share with us. And I don't know, Thabang and Setse, whether you want to do that in a few minutes. And then probably then give back to Verashni. We'd rather hear from the specialists and the stakeholders what kind of a campaign would rather carry out than us believing that we are correct. Otherwise, we'll continue to go to church and claim the non-existence of God. Matsets. Thabang.
Thank you. Is it afternoon? Should I stand?
You're short enough. I think you should remain standing.
So I think we can all agree that the issue of climate is something that concerns all of us in South Africa. But we're very divergent in how it should be dealt with, and how we're going to communicate that is very, very important. Because we can invest a lot of money and resources in communicating how we're going to bring everybody together, but it doesn't work because we have not done a lot of work in understanding what is actually happening on the ground. So a lot of work that went into developing this strategy is, quite a number of studies, perception surveys that PCC assisted in bringing our way for us to actually understand what are the feelings, what are the perceptions, what are the fears that are happening? Because as our colleague had mentioned earlier on, it's actually not about climate change, it's about life. And people are concerned about life. And how do we communicate the link between the just transition and people's life in a way that they would understand? And in these surveys that we went through, we actually got to understand that people, when they think about just transition, they tend to not be able to see the difference between PCC, the government, So there's a lot of things happening that people that are not you or I might easily understand. And the basis of the big idea, something that we as comms people would call it, is what is the big idea? One is an integrated approach that is going to use everyone, media space, journalists, CSOs, people in the community, policymakers. They all need to be part of this process. And two, to come up with a standalone campaign that is not owned by PCC or by me or by the government. Something that is independent, that is going to unite everyone around what is it that we need to do to respond to the issue of climate change in South Africa. So basically, that is just the presentation of the big idea. We're going to have a very independent, beautifully crafted corporate identity that speaks to the diversity that exists within the field on what is it that we need to do in working together to combat climate change.
Yeah, basically, thank you so much, Matsetsebale. So basically with that campaign as well, we're just looking at some of the successful campaigns that actually happened in the country. You remember Indalo Yetu back in the past, where we had, the whole, the different sectors or, stakeholders actually rallying behind one campaign, and that's essentially what we want to do with this campaign. But our insights into the strategy as well looked into what media platforms we're going to be using. We then looked at the digital media as a bigger component that we're going to be using in terms of, speaking about climate change and also creating, awareness around the just transition. And digital media will then involve, as I think Blessing has mentioned earlier on, that how do we actually use those digital media tools, like you have your TikTok, whatever. We have an issue of, the threats that are being communicated by, people who seem to be knowledgeable about climate change, and they're using Twitter as a platform to actually spread what we call fake news. How do we actually combat that using that, digital platforms like your Twitter, Instagram, your TikTok, and also we're thinking of even having your podcasts. A lot of people are actually having podcasts, and I think some people have been saying that we need to increase the prices of, podcast equipment because everyone's just, opening podcasts. But imagine if we could have a climate change and just transition podcast that actually speaks the facts, bringing all these people who are in this room, coming from policy, from communications, from academia, to actually speak about these things, and then we use this beautiful Twitter algorithm that is there, and also the TikTok algorithm that is helping us to actually bring content on people's faces. That's something that we're going to be looking at. Something that also we're mentioning within our strategy is creating a hub, whether for communicators, for media people, or even just the general public, that is going to communicate all these facts about climate change and all the processes that government is actually taking towards a just transition. And also we looked into the local community radio stations. In the areas where you find that this just transition needs to be taking place, mostly like you're in the Vryheid and also in Mpumalanga, we need to be, creating more awareness and knowledge within the local radio stations, beefing up the media with media buying, so we help them to communicate right about climate change. So but the bigger focus of the strategy will look into the digital aspect of things, but not negating or neglecting the traditional media.
Great. Let me go up here. May I take this mic? Okay, gents, well, thank you so much for that. I'm sure